Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into some seriously fascinating territory?
Yeah, this one's gonna be good.
Today we're tackling the big one, non-human intelligence.
Buckle up.
We're going to be looking at an interview with Stanford professor Garry Nolan.
Ah, Professor Nolan, now he's a fascinating guy.
Definitely. He's not just any professor, he's a leading immunologist and geneticist.
Published over 300 scientific papers.
Wow.
Yeah, and holds over 40 US patents.
Okay, so this guy's a serious scientist.
Exactly.
But he's also had some intriguing experiences of his own.
And he's done some really interesting research into this whole area of non-human intelligence.
Right, and that's what we're going to be dissecting today in this deep dive.
Looking at his arguments, the evidence he presents, how he approaches this topic as a scientist.
Absolutely. Now, just to be clear,
Yeah.
we're not setting out to confirm or deny the existence of aliens or anything like that.
Nope.
We're just here to understand Professor Nolan's perspective.
Right.
And see where it takes us.
Exactly. With open minds. Open minds, but critical thinking caps on. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so Professor Nolan kicks off this interview by talking about some early encounters.
Yeah, stuff that happened to him when he was younger that seems to have sparked his interest in this whole area.
Yeah. He describes waking up as a young kid
Oh, wow.
and seeing what he calls little guys in his room.
Little guys.
Yeah. Interesting choice of words, right?
Yeah.
But what's really striking is that he doesn't describe feeling fear,
Huh.
more like a sense of shock or surprise.
You know, that makes sense, though, right?
Right.
Like, when something totally unexpected happens,
Yeah.
your brain kind of latches onto it.
It's like a survival mechanism or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like, hey, remember this weird thing?
Just in case it happens again.
Just in case.
Right. And then a few years later, he had another experience that really stuck with him.
Okay, what happened?
He was delivering newspapers early one morning, walking through a wooded area,
Uh-huh.
and he noticed that his own shadow was moving in front of him.
Wait, his shadow was moving in front of him.
Yeah.
That's a little...
Not exactly how shadows work. Right?
Yeah, not usually, no.
And to make it even stranger, there weren't any leaves on the trees.
So where was the light coming from to cast a shadow?
Right. It doesn't really add up.
No, it does not.
So he looks up
Okay.
and he sees this object.
An object.
Yeah, moving slowly overhead, just above the trees.
Hmm.
And it had these lights that were casting this weird shadow, but it made no sound.
No sound.
Yeah.
That's creepy.
I know.
Like silent but bright.
Exactly. And later, he asked people if they'd seen anything, and nobody else had.
So it's like this totally isolated incident.
Yeah, like something out of like the X-Files or something.
Right.
What's interesting too is that this was like way before the internet
Oh, true, yeah.
and all the information overload we have today.
Right, back then, people weren't constantly exposed to UFO stories and stuff.
Exactly. So it makes you wonder if the cultural context of the time played a role in how he interpreted the experience.
Right. Like, would he have immediately jumped to UFO if it happened today?
That's a good question. Or would he try to find a more conventional explanation?
Right. Maybe it's all about how our perception of the unexplained is shaped by the information around us.
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it?
Totally.
So anyway, fast forward a few years, he comes across Whitley Strieber's book, Communion.
Oh, yeah, with that iconic cover.
Exactly. And it seems like that book kind of triggered something for him.
Like a light bulb going off.
Yeah, like it brought back all these memories of his own experiences and really sparked his scientific curiosity about UFOs and the whole phenomenon.
And that's where his background as a scientist really comes into play.
Right.
He talks about the importance of looking at data that falls off the curve, like the anomalies, the outliers.
The stuff that doesn't fit neatly into our existing theories.
Exactly. And he sees those anomalies as potential areas for breakthroughs.
So instead of dismissing the things that don't fit the norm, he's actively seeking them out.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, hey, maybe there's something really important hidden in the things we tend to ignore.
That's a powerful idea. It's like, think about your own life, right?
Yeah.
How many times have you learned something valuable or had a creative insight by questioning an assumption?
Totally. Or by exploring something that seemed out of place.
Exactly. It's like, those times when you're working on a problem
Yeah.
and you get stuck in a certain way of thinking,
Yeah.
and then you take a break, you come back with a fresh perspective,
Yeah.
and suddenly the solution is obvious.
Like you needed to step outside the normal to really see it.
Exactly. So Professor Nolan applies the same open-mindedness to others who report unusual experiences.
Like people who claim to have seen UFOs or had other paranormal experiences.
Yeah, exactly. He talks about protecting them from what he calls intellectual bullying.
Bullying.
Yeah, by people who are uncomfortable with the unknown.
Like people who are quick to dismiss anything they can't explain.
Right, exactly. And, you know, it would be so easy to dismiss those people who are claiming to see UFOs or whatever.
Right.
But instead, he approaches them with a sense of empathy.
It's like he's trying to understand their perspective.
Exactly.
Which is pretty cool, actually.
Yeah. He even goes a step further and suggests that, you know, if we entertain the possibility that these encounters are real, maybe they're a kind of intelligence test.
An intelligence test?
Yeah, like from a non-human perspective.
Where they're watching us.
Yeah.
To see if we're ready to acknowledge something beyond our current understanding.
Right. It's a mind-blowing idea, isn't it?
Totally.
Like a cosmic version of, like, you know, the mirror test.
The one they use to see if animals recognize themselves in a mirror.
Exactly. Are we as a species, like, passing the test?
Or are we still too stuck in our own little view of reality?
Wow. Big questions.
Yeah. And Professor Nolan uses some specific cases to illustrate his point. The Zimbabwe and Ubatuba events.
Oh, yeah. Where large groups of people reported seeing unexplained phenomena.
Exactly. A lot of people saw stuff they couldn't explain.
And what's interesting about those cases is that they were initially met with a lot of skepticism, even ridicule.
Especially those kids in Zimbabwe who reported seeing the UFO.
I know. But in both cases, there was eventually, like, some level of validation.
Which I think speaks to the importance of keeping an open mind.
Totally. Not dismissing eyewitness accounts just because they sound strange.
Right. Sometimes the truth really is stranger than fiction.
Now, speaking of things that seem unbelievable, Professor Nolan talks about this material he analyzed.
Okay.
That contains bismuth magnesium.
Bismuth magnesium.
And it's clearly manufactured.
Okay.
But seemingly impossible to reproduce with our current technology.
So it's like this thing exists, but we don't know how it was made.
Right. That's a pretty big deal, don't you think?
Yeah, that's pretty significant.
And get this. The government did a classified analysis of the material. Yeah. But the public version of their findings, according to Professor Nolan, was incredibly vague.
Like they weren't really telling us anything.
Right. And Professor Nolan even calls out their explanation for keeping the real analysis classified.
Which was?
To protect their analytical techniques.
Okay.
But Professor Nolan argues that's scientifically unsound.
Because?
Well, he says it's all about transparency.
Like science should be open and shared.
Exactly. He says there's a real lack of transparency when it comes to this kind of information.
It makes you wonder, what are they hiding?
Right. And why?
It's intriguing, to say the least.
Okay, so now we're moving into even more mind-bending territory.
Oh, good. I love mind-bending.
Because we're going to start exploring Professor Nolan's ideas about AI, consciousness,
okay,
and the very fabric of reality.
Okay, now we're talking. This is where things get really interesting.
So buckle up. We're about to go deep.
I'm ready. So Professor Nolan, he starts talking about this idea that a really, really advanced civilization might be able to embody AI within the laws of physics, like the very fabric of the universe.
Okay, I gotta be honest, that one's a little tough to grasp.
Yeah, it's pretty out there, but if you think about it, like we perceive the world around us as solid.
Right, like this table, my coffee cup.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you zoom in way down to the level of atoms and all those tiny particles, it's mostly empty space.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What we experience as matter is actually just energy fields interacting.
So you're saying, like, what we see as solid reality is kind of an illusion?
In a way, yeah. It's all about these patterns of energy. And Professor Nolan suggests that a super advanced intelligence might be able to actually manipulate those energy patterns.
Directly, like change reality.
Potentially, yeah. Imagine a consciousness that's not bound to a physical body.
Whoa.
But like exists within that energy field, interacting with the fabric of reality itself.
It's almost like picturing the universe as this massive computer, and this intelligence is the software running on it.
That's a really cool way to think about it.
And it kind of ties into what we're seeing with our own AI right now.
Right, like it's developing so fast.
Yeah, and we're already on the verge of creating AI that can almost perfectly mimic consciousness.
Like, so, well, we can't even tell the difference.
Exactly. So what happens when we encounter an intelligence that's like millions of years ahead of us?
Right. What would that even look like?
It makes you think about, like, what does it even mean to be conscious?
Yeah, like what is that spark?
And can something artificial truly possess that?
Right. Is it real or is it just a really good imitation?
And Professor Nolan really throws us a curveball here. He says, like, if we can't tell the difference between real consciousness and a simulation, does it even matter?
Wow.
Like, maybe that distinction is just a human construct.
Something we created because we can't even fathom a different way of being.
Right. Like, maybe we're limiting ourselves by even thinking in those terms.
It's a total mind bender.
And then he brings up another point that puts things in perspective.
What's that?
The whole concept of time scales, like how old the universe is compared to how long humans have been around.
Right, we're just babies on the cosmic calendar.
Exactly. He compares a civilization that's been around for like 100 million years to ours, which has only been out of the caves for like 10,000.
Yeah, it really makes you feel small, doesn't it?
It's humbling.
Totally. And if there are civilizations out there that are that old, what does that mean for how we understand everything, like technology, morality?
Yeah, and even just the nature of existence itself.
Professor Nolan even wonders if we're even ready for contact with such an intelligence.
Like, are we mature enough as a species?
Yeah, it's a big question.
And he uses this term moral precipice, suggesting that we're at this like critical point in our evolution.
Like a crossroads.
Exactly. And we need to decide what kind of future we want to create.
So what's Professor Nolan's take on the best path forward?
Well, he seems to think that a scarcity-free society could be the way to go, a world where everyone has what they need.
Interesting. Potentially enabled by AI, maybe.
Right. And he makes this point, like, maybe the things we fight over now...
Like resources.
Yeah, resources, power, territory. Maybe those things wouldn't even matter if we had all our basic needs met.
Right.
And access to super advanced technology.
It's a fascinating idea, isn't it?
Almost utopian, but I wonder if there could be downsides.
Like what?
Like, could a society that's transcended scarcity and mortality lose its drive?
Its sense of purpose.
Exactly. Like, would we even be human anymore in that kind of world?
Right. That's the big question.
There's a lot to think about.
And Professor Nolan, he doesn't shy away from these tough questions.
No, he doesn't.
He even touches on the idea of immortality, or at least something close to it. And how that would change everything.
Like, would we still value life in the same way?
Yeah, would we have the same drive to accomplish things if we had unlimited time?
It really makes you think about what it means to be human, doesn't it?
For sure. Our limitations, they shape us.
Yeah, like, what happens when those are gone?
And then Professor Nolan goes even further, suggesting that concepts like heaven and hell, angels and demons, might actually be our way of trying to understand interdimensional beings or phenomena we just don't have the framework for yet.
So instead of supernatural, just a different level of natural.
Exactly. Like, think about electricity a few hundred years ago.
Right. It would have seemed like magic.
Totally. And Professor Nolan even brings up Jacques Vallée.
Who's that?
He's another researcher who argues that we interpret the unexplained through our cultural references.
So we try to make the unfamiliar fit into what we already know.
Right. Even if it doesn't quite match.
It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly. And another interesting point Professor Nolan makes is that we shouldn't assume all extraterrestrial intelligence would be unified.
Like one big happy alien family.
Right. He suggests there could be multiple factions, each with their own agendas.
Makes sense, just like we see different cultures and ideologies here on Earth.
Right. So why would it be any different out there?
Good point. It really adds another layer of complexity to the whole thing.
It does. And what I found really inspiring was Professor Nolan's message to young people.
Oh, yeah. He's got some great advice.
He encourages them to be curious, to challenge assumptions, to believe in their own ideas, even if they go against the grain.
Even if people tell them they're wrong.
Exactly. And he even shares stories about times when he challenged, like, Nobel Prize winners.
Wow.
And ended up being right.
That's amazing.
That's a powerful reminder that progress often comes from those who think differently.
Yeah, who aren't afraid to question authority.
Right, those who push the boundaries.
His message is so inspiring. Like, don't let anyone tell you what you can't do.
And don't be afraid to be wrong.
Exactly.
That's how we learn.
It's all about the learning process.
And Professor Nolan also talks about the importance of sharing knowledge.
Collaboration, right.
Yeah. Creating a supportive environment where people feel empowered to share their ideas and work together.
Instead of hoarding knowledge.
Exactly. It's like, if we're going to tackle these huge questions...
Like, are we alone in the universe?
Yeah. We need to do it together.
We need all hands on deck.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the question of disclosure.
Yes, the big one.
And the role that AI might play in helping us understand UAPs.
Okay, now things are getting really interesting.
Professor Nolan seems to think that some level of government disclosure is inevitable.
Like, they can't keep it all secret forever.
Right. And he talked about those competing forces within the government.
The ones who want to keep everything hidden versus the ones who want to be more transparent.
Exactly. What do they know that we don't?
It's like, what evidence do they have? What conclusions have they reached?
And AI could play a huge role in analyzing all the data that's been collected about UAPs.
Yeah, maybe AI can help us figure out how these technologies work.
Or even where they might come from.
It's crazy to think about.
Right, like, are we on the verge of some major breakthrough?
What if AI is the key to unlocking all these mysteries?
And even if we don't get all the answers,
Yeah.
just engaging with these ideas,
Yeah.
it can expand our understanding of ourselves and the universe.
It's mind-blowing stuff for sure.
It really is. And despite all the complexities and uncertainties, Professor Nolan seems to have a really optimistic view of things.
Like, he has hope for humanity.
Yeah, he seems to believe that we can find solutions even when faced with huge challenges.
That's a really powerful message.
It is. We've covered a lot of ground here today.
We have, from little guys in bedrooms to the very fabric of reality.
And it all comes back to curiosity, open-mindedness, and a willingness to explore the unknown.
Couldn't have said it better myself. What an amazing conversation with Professor Nolan. So much to unpack there.
Yeah, Professor Nolan really gave us a lot to think about.
He did. What are some of the biggest things that stood out to you?
Well, first of all, I think it's so important to stay curious,
Yeah.
Keep an open mind, especially when you're dealing with stuff that challenges our normal way of thinking.
Like this whole idea of non-human intelligence.
Exactly. It's easy to dismiss it all as nonsense.
Right.
But Professor Nolan, he really encourages us to look deeper, to consider the possibilities.
And to do it with a critical eye, too, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He's not saying just blindly accept everything.
Right.
It's about weighing the evidence, looking at different perspectives.
Thinking for yourself.
Exactly, and forming your own conclusions.
He's such a good example of how to be both curious and indeed discerning.
Yeah, that's crucial these days.
Especially with so much information flying around.
Oh, totally. It's like, how do you know what to believe?
Right. It's overwhelming sometimes.
And something else that really resonated with me was Professor Nolan's emphasis on sharing knowledge.
Oh, absolutely. Collaboration is key.
Right. Like, we need to create a space where people feel safe sharing their ideas, even if they're way out there.
Yeah, no more hiding in silos.
Exactly. We need all the brainpower we can get, especially when it comes to something as massive as this.
I mean, it's the biggest question out there, right?
Yeah.
Are we alone?
It's both exhilarating and kind of scary, right?
Totally. Just thinking about what it would mean.
If we knew for sure.
If we actually made contact.
It's mind-blowing.
And Professor Nolan, he really seems to believe that AI will play a big role in all of this.
Yeah, it's not just about spaceships and aliens.
Right, it's about understanding consciousness, the nature of reality.
Maybe even using AI to communicate with these other intelligences.
It's like we're standing at the edge of something huge.
Like a whole new era of discovery and understanding.
I love that. Even if we don't get definitive answers.
Yeah.
Just engaging with these ideas, these possibilities.
It stretches our minds.
Exactly. It makes us think bigger, imagine things we never thought possible before.
It's a reminder that there's still so much out there that we don't know.
And that's exciting, isn't it?
Absolutely. It keeps things interesting.
It does. It's like the journey is just as important as the destination.
Right. The pursuit of knowledge, the search for truth.
That's what it's all about.
So what do you say? Ready to keep exploring?
Always. And thanks to everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the world of non-human intelligence. It's been an incredible journey. Keep those minds open, keep asking those big questions, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the unknown.